So I am Diane Egner. I'm the publisher and managing editor of 83 Degrees Media. We have been in the Tampa Bay area since 2009. How many of you are familiar with the website? Have you been to the website and read some of the stories? So there's some familiarity, good. We're part of a larger media company that's actually based out of Detroit, Michigan. This is where we are around the country. Issue Media Group is the name of the company. It started in Detroit, Michigan back in about 2005. If you think about what the narrative of Detroit was at the time, it was all about collapse of the auto industry, white flight to the suburbs, murder and mayhem downtown, decimation, fear, don't come to Detroit, it's too scary. That was the narrative. So there were these three young people, about, for me anyway, young, 30-something people, who had been working around the fringes of economic development and helping businesses grow, help businesses start up, help cafes open, art galleries open. They were seeing a lot of investment happening in the urban neighborhoods of Detroit, but it was never getting the attention of traditional media because they were so focused on collapse of the auto industry, white flight to the suburbs, and murder and mayhem in downtown. So the more they thought about this, the more they thought, they would go out and have beers together and say, gosh, we pitched that story and nobody pays attention and we can't get anybody to write about our new coffee shop that opened or our new business that moved into town. So they said, the only way we're ever going to get this done is if we do it ourselves. So let's start a media company. And instead of focusing on economic loss, which if you think about everything I just said about Detroit is economic loss, it's job loss, it's businesses lost, it's homes lost, it's murder and mayhem, loss of human capital. Instead, let's flip that model. Let's focus on nothing but economic gains. So that became their model. What they wanted to write about was economic gains. The idea being to change the narrative about Detroit, to get people to, instead of always focusing on that negative economic loss, begin to focus on the positive economic gains. So they took that narrative and visited with some economic development folks and research people at Carnegie Mellon Institution in Pittsburgh who had looked at a lot of numbers about cool cities. What is it that attracts people to places like Austin, Texas, and Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, and Boston, Massachusetts? What defines a cool city? And when they looked at this data, it basically came down to these four things. The four things that cool cities have in common is they're able to not only attract talent, but retain talent. They're cities that have either large, broad, deep pools of talent, or they're perceived to have large, deep, broad pools of talent. They're cities that not only tolerate innovation, but they actually nurture innovation. They contribute money toward helping startups, toward helping innovators, toward getting patents, toward doing the kinds of things that innovators need to get off the ground, putting capital behind innovation. They're also, all of them are cities of great diversity, particularly global diversity. Most of them are university towns. They attract people from all over the world. So if you're coming from Asia, or you're coming from South America, or you're coming from Africa to the United States to maybe get your master's degree or your PhD or whatever, you want to know that there are other people here that you maybe speak your language, understand your music, maybe practice the same religion, etc. So global diversity in every city that's hip and cool and popular and people want to live in has great global diversity. Then the fourth item was environment. All the cool cities in America and around the globe are cool not only for sort of the natural environment. We, of course, sort of own that space with all of our palm trees and warm weather and outdoor ability to be outdoors year-round. But environment, too, in terms of a built environment. Who's really paying attention to the urban community? Who's making sure that cities are walkable, bikeable, places where people want to live that are safe and clean and that you can walk your dog or your children or whatever and not worry too much about it? So that became the editorial approach for Issue Media Group, to write stories about these four things to elevate the narrative about cities, to showcase that they're cool places to be. So along about 2007, 2008, I think it was, a woman from Tampa named Deanne Roberts was the head of the Tampa Chamber of Commerce at the time, and had helped found Emerge Tampa and Creative Tampa Bay. That all came out of, I've shared this with a few people, came out of the fact that there were 4 moms that used to go hang out for drinks. We'd meet after work, usually at Bella's or somewhere in South Tampa, because we all lived in South Tampa. It was myself, Diane, Jacob, Ginger Waters, and Deanne. We called ourselves the 3 Ds and the G. For Deanne, Diane, and Ginger. And Diane Jacob always says she's the D with 2 N's and I'm the D with 1 N. So just to distinguish ourselves. But we would sit around and talk about how we all had kids. Mine happened to be the oldest. They were all looking to go to college in other states. They all wanted to get out of Tampa as fast as they could. It was not a place they ever wanted to live, or they thought, you know, as wise 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds. So we would talk over glasses of wine, many glasses of wine. You know, what can we do to keep our kids here? And we sort of agreed that one of the things that we need to do is share more stories about the Tampa Bay area with them so that they understand that this is a cool place, that there are cool places to go, there are cool places to be, cool people stay here. It's not that every cool person goes to Austin or Boston or Seattle or Portland. So in that discussion, in that same time period, Deanne was at in her role, I think, as a chamber chair, was at a conference in Chicago about cool cities. CEOs for cities had put it on. And a presentation was made by this company, Issue Media Group, about how they were changing the narrative of cities and how they had started like 4 years earlier in Detroit. Pretty soon Pittsburgh came calling. Pittsburgh said, you know, we have a narrative problem. Everybody thinks there's steel made in this town. Everybody thinks of us as a football town. Steel hasn't been made there since the 1970s. There's a whole lot going on besides the Pittsburgh Steelers football team. Carnegie Mellon, where this research came from, being a key one. It's also, you know, the home of Andy Warhol. Lots of arts in the community, lots of intellectual capital, lots of research going on. So they said, come to Pittsburgh. So Issue Media Group came to Pittsburgh. That was their second city. They were there maybe a year or so when Cincinnati came calling and said, we've got a narrative problem. People think we're like a southern hick town, and we've got these riots down in the urban area, and there's a lot of racial tension, and we need to change the narrative about Cincinnati. This goes back to like 2008. So anyway, they went from city to like being invited to come into town. So Deanne saw this, came back here, met with a bunch of the people involved with Creative Tampa Bay, Peter Kageyama, who later wrote For the Love of Cities, if you're familiar with that book, and Sigrid Tidmore, and I forget who all was on the board at the time. There were about a dozen people, I think. Marianne Frank was part of that discussion. And she said, you know, I heard about this incredible media company. They do this, you know, stories to change the narrative about cities. They're hugely successful, and at that time, I think it was 8 or 9 cities. And then she called me up, and at the time, my background is I'd worked at the Tampa Tribune for almost 25 years, the last 12 years on the editorial board, writing mostly about healthcare and local businesses. And then at the time, I was at WUSF Public Broadcasting, where I was the content director and was overseeing all the production of content on the web, the television, and the radio. So I had a cross-media, you know, experience. And Deanne said to me, you know, would you look at this? Would you check this out? See what you think. I want to know your professional opinion. Is this a good thing or not? So I came back to her after looking at it and saying, I'm intrigued. I think this is, you know, hugely important, especially coming out of our conversation about how do we keep our kids here. You got to emphasize the economic gains, the cool places, the cool things to do. So anyway, it ended up, long story short, that the owners of Issue Media Group came into town. I and Deanne and some other folks, Peter Kageyama and some other folks, met with them. We had long discussions, like 2 or 3 in the morning, talking about this idea. How can you change people's attitudes about their community? Can you get people thinking positively about your community? If, you know, think about if you're hearing this steady diet of murder and mayhem and car wrecks and men shooting men in movie theaters and white police officers killing black suspects. Is that the community you want to live in? Or is the community that you want to live in a community filled with these talented people who are doing innovative things, who are pursuing education, higher education, who are coming up with patents and so forth. So we ended up agreeing over wine at Bella's that I was going to become the publisher of this and bring it to the Tampa Bay area. So that's how it happened, basically. The model for content is the same as all of the publications around the country. Talent, innovation. We write a lot of stories that people come up to me and say, gosh, I've lived here for 25, 30 years and I had no idea all this stuff was happening. We get lots and lots and lots of positive feedback about this. Environment, sense of place, cool places. We intentionally go out and kind of mine out things that you can do, things that are, things like e-boat rides and what do you call it, paddle boarding on the Hillsborough River. One of the surveys that we had looked at, some of the data we had crunched back when we first started, was a survey that USF had done about their graduates and why they stay in the Tampa Bay area. What is the key thing? What would you guess it is?
Water.
Water's sort of close. It's not weather, but it's the ability to do things outdoors year-round, which the weather makes possible. But it's not just the weather. It's not like just the ability to lay on the beach. It's the ability to do active things outdoors year-round. So bicycling, hiking, paddleboarding, canoeing, kayaking. There's a lot of water and weather involved in that, but it's the actual physical ability to do things outdoors year-round. So we do this, we are working to change the narrative, getting people, getting the buzz, getting people talking about things other than the negative things. And if you want the negatives, if you want to know what's happening that's not good in your community, if you're fixated on the latest fatal car crash or whatever, you can find that in a lot of places. You can find it in the newspapers, you can find it in the television stations. So we're trying to carve out a niche that's not being covered. We're not trying to give you another version of what everybody else is doing. We're trying to carve out a niche with stories about things that you probably don't know about your community. We do it through feature stories. Most of our features run 800 to 1,000 words and have a full complement of photos. A lot of people know us particularly for our photos, and I know a couple of you have worked with our photographer, Julie Branneman. We also write a lot about development news. Development news is what we consider investments in property. So when somebody comes in and builds a new apartment building that's particularly designed to attract young professionals or empty nesters, we're going to write about that. We write about innovation and job news, so when people are doing new creative things, we'll write about that. We have so much of this stuff coming at us now that we can't write it all. I don't have a budget big enough to pay people to write it all. I work with a team of freelancers. We pay them by the piece. So every story that they write, we pay them for that. We pay the photographers and so forth. So my challenge as the publisher is to find the money, find more money for support. Our In the News section is all about, it's an aggregator basically of news that's similar to what we're doing in other publications. Sometimes we pull from the local media, sometimes we pull from national or international sources. We were able this year, thanks to the support of the Tampa Bay Trust Company, to start this whole new section. It's called For Good. It's all about philanthropy and things people do as volunteers, giving back, nonprofits, etc. We have several other ideas we would like to be able to launch with that kind of support that Tampa Bay Trust Company invested in us. This is what we look like on your iPhone. We have, I can never remember the name of this, but it's like adaptive technology or responsive technology. Responsive, is that it? Where no matter what device you're using, our website conforms to that device. So you get like 3 different looks out of it, depending on what size you're on or what you're looking at. Our audience overall with Issue Media Group is right around 2.7 million. This slide is actually a little bit dated, so it's probably closer to 3 million now nationally.
8 Degrees Tampa, or
no,
Issue Media?
That's Issue Media Group. That's nationwide, or global actually, not nationwide, but our publications are all but one's in the United States. We actually have one in Toronto. Our readership here this year in this calendar year will surpass about 300,000 for the year, we're seeing about 30,000 readers every month come to our site. These are who we consider our audience. We're not trying to appeal to the masses, we're trying to appeal to talent. So we appeal to people who are really engaged in the community, who are influencing other people. When we do readership surveys, these are the percentages of what people tell us. You know, we have lots of people who vote. I mean, if you're trying to influence a public referendum or something, you ought to be advertising with us, because like 93% of our readers vote. At least they say they do. There are people who are engaged in the community. They're serving on boards. They're involved in organizations like this. They're serving on their neighborhood associations. They're running for public office. We blasted out 83 Degrees to all legislators, all county commissioners, all city council members, you know, the whole elected body. Essentially, we signed them all up. Many of them actually tweet a lot about us. If you're a follower of Lisa Montilione, the city council member especially, she tweets about us constantly. She tweets about us almost as much as I tweet about us, which is, I always love that, yeah. So this is what we are. We're strictly online. We're not ever intending to be in print. 2 reasons: it's too costly, and also it limits where you can circulate. You know, if you're a magazine in print, you're going to maybe reach a small mailed audience in the Bay Area or something, but we have a global audience. 75% of our readers are in Florida, 25% are not, and they're everywhere. They're all over the world. We see pockets in different places in the world that, you know, we can guess at. We don't know for sure, but like we get a chunk of readers in the Middle East, particularly in the Saudi Arabia, Egypt, that whole area. And we think it's probably military. Qatar, we have readers in Qatar. We probably think it's a connection to MacDill Air Base. You know, they want to keep in touch with Tampa. We also see pockets of readers that spring up based on a story. For example, if we write about a company that's owned by an immigrant from Ireland or something, suddenly the readership in Ireland spikes. Or we write about a photovoltaic company that's owners are from Germany. Suddenly the Germans are reading us. It just it depends on the story, and it can vary quite a bit. We think of ourselves as a local version of kind of Fast Company magazine. What's new, what's next in business and in industry. Although that's not the only thing we write about. We also write about communities and neighborhoods. Our goal is basically helping to shape the region's future by being able to showcase that we have talent here, that we have innovation here, that we have wonderful diversity here, that we have a fabulous environment, both natural and built. You'll hear on the air things like, stories about entrepreneurship are made possible by funding from the Kauffman Foundation. So what that means is that Kauffman is saying, we think entrepreneurship's important. It's the backbone of the United States economy. So here's X number of dollars, go write about entrepreneurship. And NPR takes that money and they put a team together and they say, you know, we're gonna write 4 stories this week or whatever about entrepreneurship. And they assign the writers. They decide whether it's worth 2 minutes, 4 minutes, whether it's gonna be an All Things Considered or Morning Edition. They make those decisions. But the reason they're able to do it is because Kauffman is saying, it's important to write about entrepreneurship. So we basically use that same model. So we work with underwriters who are interested perhaps in a topic, perhaps in a geographic region. For example, the Tampa Downtown Partnership underwrites our stories about the downtown area. Okay, Tampa General underwrites stories for us about healthcare. So they're underwriting stories about a topic or what we call a focus area, and they're not underwriting stories about them. So we're not like pay for play or whatever you want to call that. But they're underwriting stories. They're making it possible. So, and then one of the benefits they get is that we offer an RSS feed of our content. So if, say, Tampa General would like to have all of our healthcare stories on their website so that they have a stream of content about innovative things in healthcare, that's one of the values we bring. We give them ad space like you were just seeing a moment ago. The ads come in different shapes and sizes, banners, rectangles. We put the logos of all of our underwriters at the bottom of the page. That's who our current underwriters are. I've got about 3 more coming on board, so I actually had to have my tech guy make a room for another row of logos. These are some of the ads. Ads in an online world, I know a lot of you know a lot more about this than I do, but in an online world need to be very different from print. If your expectation as an underwriter is to get a lot of clicks, you got to give the people a reason to click. You know, one of the best performing ads we've ever run actually was this one right here. 17 communities throughout Tampa Bay, starting at $200,000. Well, if you want to know where are those 17 communities, you've got to click on that ad. If you want to know what can I get for $200,000, you've got to click on that ad. You know, this Encore ad, the gold one, performs very well. The Grand Central Kennedy performs very well. Some of the others don't perform that well, but some of the underwriters really don't care. Their value for them is getting those stories out. They don't really care if people click on it. So it just depends on what they want. I try to coach them through. My goal is to make them as successful as I am. I want them to have a great experience with us. I want them to come back. I want them to stick with us. So yeah, I share as much as I can. I want us all to be successful. I work with a lot of nonprofits too to do free ads. I just put this one on as an example, the Feastival. I basically will trade with people. I can't do everybody. It's just not, I just don't have the time to do it. But if it's something that interests us, fits into that model, cool factors, we'll trade like in exchange for running an ad for a month, which we value at $1,000. They put our logo on their literature, considered an even swap, or whatever $1,000 is worth to them. Sometimes I get 2 seats at an event or something like that. It just depends on what they think is valuable. So I'm really open to new ideas, to things that you or your clients, ad agencies think will work. I'm working right now with PPK with a client. We've had some great discussions about how to make an ad work. And that's pretty much it.